Thank you very much for staying with KBC Channel 1. This is BizCheck here, and we are talking about matters financial management in the year 2021. I am with Mihr, Thakar, an investments analyst who is joining us from Mombasa, as well as David Kingo, who is also an investments analyst here in the studio. Now, if you're just joining us, we've talked about quite a number of things, including the savings culture of Kenyans, as well as the investment opportunities that are available for you. Now, let's talk about the environment that we are in right now. Kingo, let's start with you. The micro environment that there is, does it support this saving culture or someone's, say, ambitions to save and invest this year?
Of course, when you talk about savings, mostly the options of saving happen when the economy is quite low, just like we're speaking. Because the strategy that will be there by the government and the private sector will be to grow in terms of infrastructural development, to grow in terms of the investments, to grow in terms of business. So basically, when you buy, for example, just give a layman's example. When you buy a share now at this particular time, of course they are low because of the economic performance, the business performance currently. But in the near future, of course, there will be injection by the government, a lot of strategies to grow the economy once more. So of course the share value will rise up. So it's a high time that people can focus on savings and putting aside what they have and invest, because in the near future the economy will grow, and basically the value of whatever you bought at now will be higher at that particular time, rather than wait and try to save when the value of saving by then will be high. So you need to take advantage of that particular margin.
Right.
Yes.
Well, Thakar, if you can hear me, what do you say about investing now when things are pretty bad, so to say, in the economy?
Betty, I think we have been in a secular bear market. A bear market is a market in which prices of the shares are consistently falling. So we have been in a secular bear market since 2007, which means that although the market has risen and fallen throughout that period, it has not regained its 2007 high. And on a more recent scale, from 2015, we've been in a bear market where the NSE 20, which is an index that tracks 20 of the most popular stocks on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, has been also on having declined, at least 60% from 2015 peaks. So we actually hit a low in 2020, which was a 18-year low for that particular index. And then we have begun a gradual recovery on low volumes. So this is the accumulation phase. The investors are accumulating shares, and they are looking towards the future. They're looking towards recovery, which is, undoubtable, will happen. But it may be, not to the extent that the World Bank forecasts. For example, the World Bank forecasts that Kenya will be the fastest growing economy in sub-Saharan Africa for 2021, growing by 6.9%. And some others, like Moody's Investor Service, forecast a growth of just over 4.5%. So there are these, different ends of the spectrum for the recovery. But the recovery is no doubt happening because tourism has already begun gradually. We are seeing tourists coming in. And the education sector, which accounted for most of the drop in the contraction in GDP last year, has actually regained full activity. So this education sector will also account for a lot of the recovery. And we are hoping that rains are at least sufficient to boost our agricultural sector further. Our economy is heavily dependent on agriculture, so everything depends on good rains. 34% of our GDP comes from the agricultural sector, and more of this is actually also attributable to the agricultural sector because of the velocity and, the multiplier effect of money. So these two factors are quite important: rain and the extent of the recovery, And secondly, we would also like to see some semblance of economic recovery strategy from the government. Methods to try and boost companies, increase lending to the private sector, cut down on bureaucracy, ensure that entrepreneurs can do business freely without intervention from, for example, political interests or something of that sort. So these are some of the factors that will represent the extent of the recovery that we hope for. And for the stock market, we have definitely hit some really, really disheartening lows last year. But considering there's occurring right now, 2021 looks quite bright in my personal opinion.
Right, 2021 looks quite bright according to Thakar's opinion. Kingo, he has talked about those recovery drivers, so to say, the agriculture sector, the reopening of the education sector, as well as, of course, 2022 is a political year, or rather election year, and the matters of political stability are, of course, very important. Is there more that the government can do to ensure that the environment is business friendly?
Oh, definitely. What will happen between now and June before we read the budget is very material, and how the government is going to manage political instability. And then once we read the budget, definitely we hope to see a budget that is geared toward money supply. And when you say a budget that's geared toward money supply, is a budget that is supposed to put money into people's pocket and have investment structures or even development agendas as trying to touch every sector of the economy. So then after that, definitely will be in a heated political time. So the stability that the president is trying to promise, definitely they know once we have unstable politics, then definitely we have to go back to square one. So we'll not say, we'll even be having a conversation of what would have happened even before COVID-19. So we'll write off 2019 and we write off 2020. So we hope we shall have a very stable political structure, because once it is unstable, definitely whatever impact we'll have gained between now and June will be written off. So definitely it's supposed to be on how the budget will be, and the stability of the economy. Definitely that one will determine a lot in terms of how we expect the economic recovery strategies to be. Yes.
The 2020 changed the way the world really does business, and there are some sectors that, despite the closure of others, there are others that really gained from that particular pandemic, including especially the digital sector or the tech sector. Do you foresee more investments in this sector to continue supporting the recovery of the economy, both locally and internationally?
Okay, basically it depends with the contribution to the GDP. So based on how much technology will bring to the GDP, definitely determines how much allocation will be given. But what I see mostly is the government way forward will be on the big four agenda. Of course, they are still running, and agriculture will be a key aspect they're going to fund a lot. Because our economy, as we had my friend mentioned, that 34% comes from agriculture. So once we don't have food security, definitely we are going to be strained across all sectors. Even the investment and saving that we're trying to mention here, they are based on something called disposable income. The income that remains after you've done taxation, after you paid all your particular bills, then you can now say, this is the much I can have to survive. So once the cost of food goes higher because agriculture is not stable, definitely we're going to lose a lot as an economy, and even savings will not be material. So it depends with how much technology is trying to contribute to the GDP. But the key economic drivers in this country were affected. So when you talk about agriculture, you talk about food security, you talk about tourism, we talk about infrastructural development. That's the angle that the government is going to look at. So technology might be beefed up, but more of incentives for it to grow and to be a measurable factor in the GDP.
In the GDP, yeah. Right. Thakar, what do you foresee are the sectors that investment is going to go, or rather investors are going to be looking at this year?
Saying that tech will be a particularly interesting sector because of Nairobi's youthful population. The urban population actually is quite youthful, and with low dependency ratio, and people are just getting the hang of formal employment. So that's a sector that will be interesting, targeting domestic demand. But also we have manufacturing. The president will be intent on increasing investment in manufacturing this year, considering that he is reaching his term limit. And this would mean that they will actually bring more people into electricity tariff areas like Wachira Industrial Park, so that they can manufacture at 5 per kilowatt hour. And also there is a provision for some of the very high consumption manufacturers to manufacture at 7.5 per kilowatt hour. So I would think that the president would look at, maybe agro-processing, because our economy already has ample supply of agricultural products. So that would be something he would look at. And then, with those concessional tariffs in certain and foreign consumptions, there will also be potential to invest in a wide variety of different ventures. In fact, I'm also seeing the potential that we will soon have announced that somebody has set up for manufacturing coronavirus vaccines. So the variety of investments will be quite massive. Like last year, we saw that our stations spearheaded local manufacturing of PPEs for the medical workers against a pandemic. So these three sectors are actually quite interesting. Tech.
Well, Thakar, we seem to have lost you there, but he was talking about the sectors that are going to be receiving quite some investment from the government as well as other investors, including the technology sector. He has talked about manufacturing with a focus on agro-processing to ensure that the agriculture sector is tapped to its maximum, considering really it is the driver of Kenya's economy. Kingo, what are your views?
Of course, I echo his sentiments, but what the government has really invested a lot in the recent past is developing of our infrastructure in terms of roads and connection networks. Basically, they have an objective. Because once you want to focus on manufacturing and food security, you cannot produce food product that you cannot sell to the market. You can't reach the market. So they are trying to develop roads so that people can easily access the market. Once we have good roads, also the cost of transport gets lower. Once we have XDR, the cost of transport gets lower. So in that particular way, you are able now to focus on manufacturing. And we're on the tail end of the infrastructural development that the government has been doing. So what next the government focusing on will be manufacturing, agriculture sector, and I say there will be incentives for technology, because we're still in the traditional production methods as an economy. So we still have incentives, as we've said, even the government has said, even on the processes that the government that we citizens process our document through the government. So they are saying there will be now use of technology in accepting some of the processes. We've seen even the judiciary going online. So those are incentives that they are trying to put across so that people can now understand we can still have some efficiency in using technology. So once, because we, as I mentioned, on the tail end of infrastructure, the next aspect will be on manufacturing, agriculture, and food security in the country. So we expect a lot of funding on that particular aspect. And once we have manufacturing rising up, we have agriculture rising up, even commercial banks, because people will consume less on food, because that's the biggest contributor of our inflation, then there will be now savings and investments, and you will see financial institutions even trying to stabilize. Yes.
Right. Even as we talk about now the budgeting process for the year, one big challenge that the government faces is, of course, the debt that has been ballooning. There is also the inclusion of some 3.4 trillion that was now added to the 7 trillion. That closely says that we have already hit our debt ceiling, really. What can be done to ensure that this challenge can be really surmounted?
I think what number one got the government off guard was the COVID-19 issue, because most of the debt payments that will come from tax collection, because all this money that is being brought in terms of debt is used to spur the economy or to trigger economic growth, and people, because of what you call the multiplier effect, people are able to invest. And I just want to give a layman's example. By the virtue that the superhighway Thakar was constructed, people were able to open new businesses. These new businesses were tax avenues for the government. So if there was a debt that was supposed to be paid, the new businesses would be new income that is able to service this particular debt. So when you look at all this, you try to understand that because the government wanted to trigger the economy through this particular debt, but now COVID-19 came and people did not invest as expected. The taxes were cut, we've pay that was reduced, and many tax options that have been reintroduced in a different way, but the net effect is that tax has been reduced. So the government is going to get a challenge. I thought that we're having a discussion where they are going to have the debt management strategy, where they're saying we're going to change our loan portfolio from USD to euros. They're trying to even to argue about, can we extend our term loans? So they're going to buy time so that they can stabilize. So all these are structures that the government is trying to say, we borrow these particular laws so that we can trigger our infrastructural development, or that we can have a multiply effect, and then we're able to get new tax avenues. So give us time so that we stabilize and we are able to pay these taxes. However, I'm sure the government, based on the debt recovery strategy, the management strategy that I saw with the CS, we're still not out of the curve in terms of managing the same. Yes.
Well, Thakar, I hear you are back. We are talking about now a challenge that is going to, say, affect government's planning of the finances this year. That is debt, the debt that has been ballooning over the years. And now with the challenges, it's really a catch-22 situation. You want money from the public or from Kenyans in terms of revenue, but at the same time, Kenyans are looking up to you to ensure that you put money in their pockets. That's up to the government. What are your views on even the debt suspension that was announced the other day by the CS in charge of Treasury? The Paris Club and Kenya signed an MOU of about 36 billion just being postponed, the payment period for the next 6 months or so. They're also seeking a further about 40 billion from the G20. And these particular efforts that are being put in place by the government to ensure that they delay the loan repayment, do you think they will suffice?
Well, Betty, I don't think they will suffice, because, you know, when you have a relief of about 70 billion from 500 billion, then, you know, it's not really going to cut it. But, you know, that money can actually be used elsewhere. So in that way, it can help. But that money will actually have to be paid eventually. So it will be rolled over in the debt. So in my opinion, it will help with the cash flow of FRCs, but not overall in the debt situation, because our debt is, you know, it has grown really. We have been running budget deficits of 8% and even over. So our debt has actually grown from 1.7 trillion in 2013 to 7.1 trillion as at the end of September 2020, and that's over 320%. And over that same period, nominal GDP, which is, real GDP is more important. It's grown by just 40%. So yes, our debt is also a product of our low savings culture, because, you know, the government does have to invest in infrastructure projects, but a lot of it has to come from, you know, the domestic markets as well as the foreign markets. So as well as crowding out the private sector, it also further exacerbates the lack of money going towards entrepreneurs by crowding out the private sector.
Right, Thakar, as you've put it, your opinion is that this effort will not suffice. Is there more that can be done to, say, better the situation, considering the debt hole that we already are in?
Not much can be done, because such loans have to be repaid. What we can do is to, you know, try and maintain our spending so that it doesn't keep rising, just maintain it at a manageable level, of course, a larger and larger share of our spending then keeps going towards debt, because the interest costs pile up and even the debt repayments pile up. So that will be a problem, but what we can focus on is on growing our economy, bringing more people into the formal sector, cutting the bureaucracies, making the business environment more favorable for all categories of entrepreneurs, ranging from the huge corporates all the way to the small SMEs. And, of course, that does not mean we target everyone and anyone for more tax revenue by, arbitrarily raising the tax rates or, different forms of taxes in every budget cycle. But it does mean that we attempt to bring more informal sector employees and workers in the sector. And the best way to do that, as earlier mentioned, is to increase lending to the informal sector.
Increasing lending to the informal sector. Kingo, do you agree with this? And maybe to follow up on that, KRA, the Kenya Revenue Authority, has been missing its collection target for years now. What do you foresee for, say, this past year? They already said that really they were dented, and even the tax relief now coming back, or rather the taxes coming back, that tax relief being removed. What do you foresee for this year?
Of course, when you talk about tax collection, the failure sometimes is on the KRA part, because the structures for tax collection, they're not there. So someone who is doing business of a butchery in the village is similar to a person who is doing any business here in Nairobi. So the way someone doing business in Nairobi has ability to pay taxes should be the same way someone in the village should have an ability and avenue to pay tax. So when then the person in the village is not able to pay tax and they are willing to pay, so it means the issue is on the tax collector. So they need to increase the mechanisms of tax collection. Number two, when we talk about lending to trigger the economic growth, we have an issue here. So government doing domestic borrowing wipes out money that is available in the commercial banks for individuals to borrow. And that one really messes the economy. And when you remember the issue of interest capping, people are not able to borrow. Then we moved to COVID-19. Of course, business collapses, and the ability to have new business has reduced definitely.
Right.
So what we say here is that if, for example, in 2013, someone was able to borrow a loan in a commercial bank and they were given at 20%, this person 2020 or 2021 cannot be given the same loan by a commercial bank at a lower interest rate. So meaning the commercial banks are focusing on something else. Whenever it is viable, wherever it is, it's an option for commercial bank to put money in treasury bills and bonds, instead of giving that money to individuals so that they can start businesses, then what happens, something we call the crowding out effect. The private sector is crowded out. So we need government to have more incentives to push money to the individuals by doing more association with commercial banks and telling them, we need you to give loans to this particular individual. We need to understand your loan book. We need to understand your core business. We need to even to cap the amount of money that you put in the government investment, so that we can have people be given the ability to borrow, because that's the only way you can circulate money in the economy. It's the only way you can push economic growth even to individual people. Because if someone wants to start, for example, a salon in the village that can be able to pay taxes, and they are not able to start this particular business because they don't have capital, when they go to a commercial bank, they're told, we can't give you money because we don't understand your ability to pay. So that business is stopped, and KRA can never collect tax from that particular business. But when they go to commercial banks and they're told, we have this particular incentive where we are giving loans to individuals who want to start small businesses because the government has cushioned interest on this particular facility. So you're able to get your money, you start your business, you pay your loan, and the government collects its taxes. And that is what we call economic growth in a nutshell.
All right.
Yes.
Well, this conversation will be continuing in just a little bit. We'd like to take you to the courts now at the Milimani Law Courts, where a case on the loss of 1.9 billion Kenya shillings in the Kisumu oil jetty is going on. We want to listen into those proceedings. The case is against former finance manager Samuel Odoyo, as well as former infrastructure development manager Billy Aseka, as well as the KPC managing director Joe Sang, among others. Let's listen into those proceedings.
Some money annually. But having said that, all parastatals, when they submit their budgets to Treasury, Treasury requires that we review and support the budget or not before submitting to National Treasury.
So in terms of budgeting, your ministry is involved in terms of supporting the budgets that go to the National Treasury for these corporations?
Yes, once they are approved by the board.
They are approved by the board.
Yes, sir.
That would be the respective boards of the
State corporations.
corporations. Now, coming to the matters before this court, I would like you to kindly tell us, in respect to a project known as Kisumu Oil Jetty that was undertaken by Kenya Pipeline Company. Now, did you have any engagement with Kenya Pipeline Company in respect to this project?
Yes, I did.
In a nutshell, what was the nature of the engagement?
Like I said in my opening remarks, one of the things that the ministry does is oversight the parastatals for that they perform the strategic intent of the government. And in this case, we had been to a meeting of the Northern Corridor, Heads of State Summit. And it was agreed that lake transport would
During the Head of State
summit.
What?
It was June 2016. When was it? Can't remember exactly. It's in my statement.
I would like to refer the witness to his statement.
Yes. Thank you. It was in 2016 June that lake transport should become a priority to reduce congestion on the road.
That what transport?
Lake transport. Your Honor, what had transpired for this to happen was the Uganda government had complained about the many roadblocks in Kenya and was, as a result, said that it was increasing the cost of their goods. So lake transport was then suggested to be a way in which we could mitigate these costs.
Well, that is the Petroleum and Mining Principal Secretary there, Andrew Kamau, who is giving a witness statement concerning the case on the loss of 1.9 billion shillings in the Kisumu oil jetty. The case is against the finance manager, Samuel Odoyo, as well as former KPC, the former finance manager rather, Samuel Odoyo, former infrastructure development manager, as well as the former KPC chief executive. And Sarafina Robi is on the ground and will be bringing us that particular report in our subsequent bulletins. We now move to the Pan-Africa Hotel, where the institution of Commission of Jurists is just having a presser there on their views on matters, the Building Bridges initiative. Let's listen into that.
Effectively, a new funding mechanism for RAMCA globally. Little is known about GFF by most stakeholders, and yet it's a very important key player in RAMCA. So for us to hear this background, all the information about GFF, we'll have to invite Dr. Malatela. Oh my God, I'm so sorry for saying it wrongly. Malatela Tuonane. I'm so sorry, Dr. Yes, who is the GFF coordinator, the GFF secretariat coordinator. Karibu Daktari, and let me apologize for misspelling your name, and you can invite Joyce after that. Karibu.
And honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me well? Okay. Good morning, and apologies for the chair. And my name is Maritela Tuani. It's pronounced Tuani, not Tuani, as many people
by the International Commission of Jurists, and they are giving their position on the Building Bridges Initiative report and the proposed constitutional amendments. Of course, there is a process that will be ongoing, and Safina Ching will be bringing us the details in a little bit. Here in studio, we have David Kingo. He is an investments analyst, and online via Zoom, we have Mihr Thakar. He is also an investments analyst based in Mombasa. We have been discussing financial management for businesses, for individuals for the year 2021. We have had a recap on what transpired in 2020, as well as what you can do to ensure that things are looking up in 2021, as well as just what the government can do to ensure that the business environment is tick for business this year. And before we joined our reporters on the ground, we were talking about matters revenue collection. Remember that even as the government is trying to get a revenue from the country or from its citizens to run daily government operations as well as infrastructure development, there is also the need for the government to put money in Kenyans' pockets. David Kingo, before we joined our reporters there, could you just give us a recap of what you were saying, please?
Oh, definitely. What I'm mentioning is that how the government is trying to put money into people's pocket is a key issue. And remember, the last year budget was about money supply. We heard about government talking about youth employment, that we've investment funds being pushed to where people can go into invest and some income out of there. So the same way we are going to have an option of money supply through commercial banks, and that's where the government has really failed. Because when you look at in the few years ago about interest rate capping and government borrowing locally, what do we mean by when the government borrows locally? It means that we have an incentive whereby commercial banks are able to place money in government bonds and securities. This money should have been used to lend to individuals, and that's why I gave a scenario how the economy is run and what is economic development, what is economic growth. So if, for example, you're an individual and you want to open a business somewhere, so you need some capital to start this particular business. So you go into a commercial banks and ask for a facility, then they tell you you're not able to give you this particular loan because we foresee inability to pay that particular business. Therefore, the environment of doing the business is not okay. So your business might collapse at some point. So you're not given this particular money to go and invest. So what will happen is that if you started this particular business, of course you have earned an income where the Kenya Revenue Authority would come to tax and get their own income. But what has happened, you've not been able to start this particular business because you do not have access to credit. So of course the Kenya Revenue Authority will not collect these taxes, and that's how we call it the crowding out effect, because the commercial banks are trying to push money because it's more secure with the government rather than giving it to individuals. So the government need to refocus on that and push commercial banks to lend to individuals, because that's how we supply money in the economy and people are able to start their own businesses. When you look at this COVID-19 period, people have been strained. Whatever they had saved basically to invest in the future has been used for consumption. So the only way we can trigger this economy is trying to look in different ways that we can put money into these people's pocket, different ways that we can have conducive business environment, different ways that we can have low cost of starting business, different ways of spreading our tax structures, that we don't press individuals that want to start businesses with taxes rather than give them some tax holiday to come and pay taxes in the later date. So it's all about incentive that will put money in people's pocket, because that's where the country is strained, that's where the economy is strained. And when you do that, basically, we'll have a vibrant economy and people will invest. Because as I said earlier, if someone was able to borrow a loan in the last 5 years as 20% and be able to start a business and grow it, why are we not able to get these loans currently at 13% and still grow similar businesses? So it means there is an issue that the government needs to focus on pushing money supply through commercial banks.
Okay.
Yes.
Kingo and Thakar, just hold on for a little bit. We'd like to take the viewer back to that International Commission of Jurists presser on matters the Building Bridges Initiative and their recommendations. Let's listen into that.
Postures that can change, requiring only the political will on the part of the political class. For example, we do not require a constitutional amendment to increase the resources to the devolved counties to 35%. We don't require any constitutional amendment to include the ward allocations to 5%. That has already been provided in the current constitution. The issues about the youth are already contained in the current constitution. They don't require any constitutional amendment. They require political goodwill, which is not present or visible in the current administration. Our further analysis, we posit that the BBI report does not lay out clearly defined argument for substantive constitutional reforms as a response to measures or to the challenges which have been raised. Therefore, the proposed constitutional amendments will not be the magic bullets to the current socio, economic and legal concerns that affect the Kenyan public. Finally, ICJ Kenya reservations regarding the BPI reforms remain consistent with those taken in 2018 when the BBI process was commenced. We have not changed our process. We restate that there are currently many social, political, health, economic concerns that Kenya is grappling with, ranging from corruption, mismanagement of public funds, socio-economic challenges, poor leadership, negative ethnicity, and many others. These lingering challenges include the COVID-19 pandemic, We remain concerned that the calls for referendum should not be the priority for our country at this time. The resources should be applied adequately to ensure and reflect what the Kenyan people right now require, not necessarily ensuring the resources are going for unnecessary amendments that are not going to change the lives of the Kenyan people who require adequate and proper implementation of the current constitution. The 2010 constitution provides mechanism to curb corruption and inculcate national values and principles in Kenya. What is required is a political will to implement the Constitution of Kenya 2010 fully. In conclusion, whereas ICJ Kenya supports calls for a unified Kenya, we reject the BBI proposals on constitution amendments in totality and reiterate that the amendments are unnecessary. The issues identified can be cured by entrenching political will, instituting policy and legal reform. What the Constitution 2010 requires is meaningful, deliberate implementation in all its core areas. We call on Kenyans to join our rallying call to the political class to implement the Constitution 2010. Tekeleza Katiba Sasa. We want that Constitution implemented fully. And I want to state this as I conclude. The counties require resources. You cannot give counties resources without transferring functions to the counties. Transfer the functions and the resources will follow. And we're saying this. Schedule 4 of the Constitution 2010 provides what functions must go to the counties. These functions are still held at the national government level. We are seeing several areas where the national government is still trying to take back those resources that have been transferred to the counties. We kindly request that this be implemented fully. Then we can do a total review and overhaul of what has happened in the last 10 years and what we intend to do beyond this time. Thank you all. God bless Kenya.
The International Commission of Jurists, they are giving their views on matters the Building Bridges initiative, and they are saying that they are rejecting the BBI proposals. They demand the implementation of the Constitution as is. They say that those proposals are not necessary at this moment, and they say that the government should ensure that they transfer functions to counties and the money will follow. Of course, quite a number of views they are being given by the ICJ. Many people have been giving their views on matters Building Bridges initiative. We continue with the coverage of how that unfolds, and Safina Cheng Oma is on the ground there and will be bringing us that particular report in a little bit later. But here in studio, we continue with our conversation on matters financial management and just planning for this year. Mihr, Thakar, if you can hear me, before we joined our reporters there on the ground, we were talking about the revenue collection, and Kingo mentioned the matter of formalization of the informal sector to ensure that the tax net is just widened, to ensure that more people are paying taxes as they should and give more money to the government to continue running the day-to-day activities of the country. What do you think should be done to just bring these people now to the tax bracket?
Apart from my earlier point on increasing lending to them, so suggest that it's not to increase economic freedom, cut all the bureaucracy, make it very easy for somebody to start a business. And of course, we already discussed that they should be able to find the business bureau like the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and to ask them the relevant questions and to get quick answers. But in addition to that, they should also be able to do business without interference from, say, for example, their trucks can be, as long as they follow all the rules and the laws and regulations, their trucks cannot be stopped on the way, in haphazard manners. And, their goods suddenly inspected without reason or cause, and delays in their, releases of imported goods and things like that. We have to find ways to remove non-tariff barriers, not only on the international trade scene, as the term is usually used, but also in the domestic business environment in regard to, seamless flow of operations So, we have a very high level of freedom of expression in Kenya as compared to other African countries, which is a very good environment for bringing about innovation. So, as we can see in the US, another country which has a lot of freedom of expression, that's where we are seeing the crucible of tech innovation. So this is a very good environment to innovate. But then again, we need economic freedom. Not like you just want to, play music in your matatu and you need to go and get a license for 10,000. This type of business environment is not conducive to the conducive environment that we have created from freedom of expression. So this is something that we must work on as a nation, and also the government must prioritize.
Right. Thakar, as you mentioned, the issue of just ensuring that there is economic freedom there is always an argument that when, say, you give the taxes, they go to the government, the runaway corruption maybe kills the spirit of Kenyans to even contribute these taxes or to be formalized in a way to ensure that they are contributing their fair share of it. Do you think that this can be remedied?
You see, the biggest problem with corruption is the manner in which our politics are structured. You see, our politics requires a lot of campaign contributions from a huge number of sources that are all looking for their personal gains. So when somebody comes to power, they have a lot of political debts to pay. And then you see all these campaign contributions that have come through, including campaign contributions that are used to give random handouts in slums. These all have to be repaid. So you see, the issue of corruption is twofold. One is, should the person who benefited from campaign contributions go against those who are then benefiting from his from those who are benefiting from his leadership, as well as those who are benefiting from illegalities that his leadership has to make the difficult decision to eradicate. And then secondly, we also have to think about the ethical construct here. If a presidential candidate or a governor candidate or an MP candidate has to give handouts to the voters, then, you have to think that those handouts will have to be recovered from somewhere. And they are likely to, look into either exploiting state resources or in, using state permissions in an unethical manner. For example, the CDF kitty is one place where a lot of audit work needs to be done to ensure that it's not being misused to recoup campaign funds. So these are structural problems, and we need to work on a way of cutting down on all the campaign spend. And this will be difficult to enforce, because how do you go into the village and make sure that somebody's agents are not giving handouts? Mm-hmm. So I agree that we have a corruption problem, but it's not easy to solve unless somebody ascends to the top and then betrays those who helped him ascend to the top.
Wow, quite an interesting perspective there. Kingo, what is your view on the runaway corruption in the country? The government has been doing a lot to try and, just lower the rate of corruption, so to say, and make sure that these people who are perpetrating the corruption itself are brought to book. But is it enough?
Definitely, as my friend mentions, corruption as like a virtual institution. It has its own processes, it has its own structures, it has its own key players, it has a management, it has all sets that you will have in a formal setup. So basically, fighting corruption is a key issue that the government need to focus, because of a lot of, let's say 3% of the budget can easily go into corruption and it's misused. So definitely the government need to really focus on that and kill those structures, because the amount that is lost and the derail that happens. I just give you examples of projects that we had. They have corruption, they have court cases, they have been delayed. So when you start a project, there is the completion time frame. So once you have corruption issues and the matter goes to court, then it is delayed. Of course, the completion time is extended, and the economic benefit that was supposed to be harnessed from that particular project, it's changed shapes definitely. So the economic structure of that project is already not viable, because people have moved out, they have gone into different businesses. They are no longer doing businesses, or they are no longer intending to do business that connects that particular project because it has delayed. So the economic impact of corruption and in terms of struggling the economic growth is so high, and the government needs to refocus on killing those structures. Yes.
All right. Okay, so as we come to a close of this conversation, I'll start with you, Mihr Thakar, there in Mombasa. What are your closing remarks and maybe your outlook for the year 2021? And if you could just make that short, maybe 30 seconds, please.
Well, first of all, I'm looking positively towards inflow of more concessional foreign debt, which will help boost our FX reserves and perhaps stabilize the Kenya shilling. This is concessional debt from the IMF and World Bank. Estimates put it at 350 billion. So this will help propel our FX reserves back to over 5 months of import cover, perhaps 5.5 from 4.7 currently, and just above the EAC convergence criterion of 4.5. Secondly, I also look forward to an environment that promotes more lending to businesses, from removing the arm twisting of lenders by the regulator and allowing them to lend freely to high-risk groups, reflecting the pricing that's inherent in such groups. And third, I would also request that some work towards eradicating corruption and implementing more projects that are beneficial to the citizens, like, for example, the recent railway that was done for domestic use in Nairobi. Such projects should also be prioritized. And I think we should also look at ensuring that the state-owned corporations become healthy again, including Kenya Power and other corporations which are under distress but are very valuable to the citizens.
All right, thank you very much, Mihr Thakar, there, investments analyst from Mombasa. Just to close, David Kingo, what are your closing remarks? 30 seconds, please.
So definitely what I mentioned is that the government needs really to focus on money supply and putting money into people's pockets. So the conversation of interest capping was closed, but now still commercial banks are not lending. So the government needs to discuss with the central bank and see how much they can cure that, so that people can have money into their pockets. Number two is putting money into people's pockets through what we expect in the forthcoming, in the coming budget analysis or budget release, to ensure that we still trigger the economy. Number three is that we don't kill our economic recovery strategy after COVID-19 with politics. Let us have seamless politics that are not affecting our economy and businesses, and in that way we shall see a fruitful 2021.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here to discuss matters financial management. I have been with Mihr Thakar as well as David Kingo. They are both investment analysts. Thank you very much for your time. Well, we shall be back with more after this short break. Do stay with us.